Welcome to Pop Screen, part of the Geek Show podcast network. We are the Geek Show's podcast dedicated to the good, the bad and the bizarre of movies, either starring, about or by pop stars. No, the podcast covers such a broad range of musical and cinematic genres, from country and western to hip-hop, from documentaries to science fiction. I'm Graham Williamson. I'm a film critic for thegeekshow.co.uk and the British horror website horrified.com. And this week I've been joined by...
Mark Cunliffe. I'm also a writer on The Geek Show. You can also find me at We Are Cults. I've wrote some booklet essays for various Arrow films, and I'm currently got a chapter in Scarred for Life Volume 2, which looks at 1980s television.
Very exciting, that. I should mention my booklets a bit more because I'm very proud of them.
Yeah,
I just
absolutely
always forget
should.
to mention them. But yeah, I buy inlay booklets for second run. I've done them for The Fabulous Baron Munchausen, The Year, and Tomorrow I'll Wake Up and Scald Myself with Tea. All films that are as good as their titles, I would say.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
But for now, let us go back to the late 70s, where among the very, 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 very many things that the British punk movement of the day was opposed to was the notion that their scene was being commodified or exploited by outsiders who didn't really understand it. As a result, there are very few fictional films about the movement. It's only really now that British punk can be put in its proper context as a backdrop to Disney's Cruella de Vil origin story. But at the time, only one major British filmmaker got to make a movie about punk as it happened. He was Derek Jarman, and this is his tie.
Oh, I was wondering why you were wearing a tie.
Do you think it was just like a post-punk thing?
I just thought you were,
just
I don't know, actually. Yeah, I just thought you were. Yeah. I was going to say, tie, looking very formal. How have you got Derek Jarman's tie?
I am not entirely sure this story stands up to scrutiny, but a friend of mine worked in a shop that it wasn't an antiques shop, but it dealt with some rarities and collectibles and first editions and things. And someone once delivered a package from a friend or a relative who died, and it had some quite sort of personal correspondence between them and Jarman. So obviously that went on sale as a collectible, but it also had this tie. And although it's possible, I guess, that the guy's tie just fell in the box while it was all being parcelled up, there is obviously a part of me that absolutely wants to believe that I own Derek Jarman's tie.
Always go with the legend. Yeah, print the legend, as John Ford would say. But yeah, definitely Derek Jarman's tie. Definitely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow.
No, this is Derek Jarman, and we are reviewing his 1978 film Jubilee, which I think is the only film in cinema history to inspire a response T-shirt.
Yes, Vivienne Westwood's horrible critique. Yeah.
That'll learn him.
Horrible, homophobic.
I haven't actually read the thing. I've seen pictures of it online, but it is such it just looks like that guy who lives in one of the poorest streets of your town and puts boards outside his house explaining how, the American government's stealing his thoughts. It looks like that, but on a T-shirt. It's this loser-length post of tiny, tiny text. So yep. I do not know exactly what Westwood's objections were.
She sort of calls him I think it's a gay public school boy jerking off at titillation or something like that.
Well, I can see why the owner of sex would be so opposed to titillation, yes.
Yeah. I think she was more opposed to the fact that he took away Jordan, really. I think that was a real criticism of the film. But maybe we're getting ahead of ourselves.
I don't think so. I think we should probably talk about Jordan because A, she was in a lot of ways the impetus for this film, and B, she is a figure who was, I think, only recently been sort of rediscovered and reappraised for her influence on British punk.
Yeah, there's a very good memoir of her life that she's co-written with Cathy Unsworth that I heartily recommend anybody tracking down and having a read of. It's called Defying Gravity, which of course is a line from the film.
Yes, it is. Yes, I hadn't put two and two together on that, but that's lovely. Did she like the film?
Yeah, she did. Yeah, I think she's one of the few who actually always seem to like the film. There's been a sort of shifting sands of opinion, really, hasn't there? I mean, I think Adam Ant, I think, really criticised it when it came out, and then he now says that he really enjoys it. Toya is another one who's always enjoyed it. Vivienne Westwood has now retracted that T-shirt. Apparently,
she printed a stupid correction.
I know you'd really think it would be more in keeping of a sort of thing to write to just to listen. I was wrong in a myriad of different letter sets, but no. But apparently, no, she did go up to somebody and say, "Oh yeah, I did get that wrong," and she's ensured it can't be reprinted or something. That's what I hear anyway. So she's obviously had a change of heart as well, I suppose. But no, Jordan's. Well, I think her and Jarman just hit it off straight away, didn't they? And I think she's always been a very loyal keeper of the flame. Really.
Yeah, because part of what made Jarman vulnerable from attacks from within the punk scene is that he was not an especially big fan of it. And punk was, at this point, a movement where you absolutely had to prove your bona fides before you could even say a word about it. In many ways, it still is, I think.
Yeah, probably one of the few that still is like that, isn't it? You're either punk or you're not, is that whole sort of mantra, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
But nobody can be quite sure what punk actually is. And I think that's where this film does so well, really, that it does just sort of skewer a lot of the pretension and hypocrisy of a movement that was, I mean, it was short-lived anyway, but it was probably in its infancy when the film was being made.
Yeah, because it'll have been made during the Silver Jubilee year, which was really the moment where British punk crested. Obviously, to any of our international listeners, this will sound crazy because, of course, in America and in a lot of other countries, punk never became so big so quickly. And as a result, the American punk scene certainly lasted a very long time and produced a lot of innovative and interesting work over many decades. But part of the problem with the British charts, particularly in the late 20th century, is that we are early adopters, which is credible in some ways. But the British record buying public tends to seize on something very early. And the risk of that is that it becomes drained out very quickly.
Yeah.
And I think punk was really the ultimate example of that, because it's not just because the British punk scene's flagship band, the Sex Pistols, imploded so horrifically, though that's obviously a pretty good kind of symbol for what was going on. I think maybe one of the things that kind of really riled people about Jubilee, it's not just that it was critical of punk, and it's not just that it was an outsider, because in some ways punk thrived off outsiders getting angry at it. It's that what Jarman's criticisms of punk are obviously very distinct from your average tabloid leader writer, and they're a lot harder to shake off.
Yeah, he sees it for what it is, really, doesn't he? He knows. I mean, I think the key indicator of it is the character of Borgia Gintz. Is that how we pronounce it?
Yes. Played by
Orlando.
Well, what was his real name? He was
Jack Burkett.
Jack Burkett, and he was a member of Lindsay Kemp's dance troupe, who, of course, had mentored David Bowie early in his career, and they turn up for a scene in this. It was for queer London art. Lindsay Kemp's dance company was a big nexus at a time when there were not many nexuses.
Absolutely, yeah. But I think his character, this sort of uber camp, almost Bond villain like music business Svengali, a lot of people see Malcolm McLaren in it, which might be another reason why Westwood was so against it. But I think it's a laser-like focus of Jarman to just hone in on the very thing that will end up killing the movement, which is the money men coming in and buying everything up and making it some homogenized, acceptable form of musical statements. And it's in that film, and I guess the punks at the time didn't want that. They wanted the Clockwork Orange, and what they got instead was a very cynical a film that ended on a very cynical note that sort of said, well, this is your moment, but you're on strings, really, aren't you? You're puppets on strings. You don't get to write the history of your story. And I think that's a very profound sort of message that the film has.
And it's strange, really, because the Sex Pistols had already released EMI by this point, a song whose message is not, boy, we're happy to sign for EMI. I hope we make a lot of great records with this excellent company. But I suppose that's the bona fides thing. Again, Johnny Rotten could say that punk was being exploited by the money men because he was a punk. And so his statements on the scene had a moral legitimacy, but nobody wanted to hear it coming from Jarman, even though
no, that's right.
Jarman's early films, I mean, if you define punk as being anti-establishment and capable of ruffling feathers, he was punk.
He is the punk godfather, basically, isn't he? Yeah, there's nobody more. I mean, I think Jordan has said that as well, in the sense that yes, he might be middle class, he might have a very posh accent, he might be well spoken, but you can't get more punk than Derek Jarman, because he's gay at a time when to be gay was not something that many people would shout from the rooftops. It's only recently been legalized. And he was repeatedly a filmmaker who repeatedly just didn't obey any rules whatsoever.
Yeah.
So, I mean, how much more punk can you get, really?
Completely. Yeah. I think one of the things that he's sort of taking aim at here is, and it links in with the criticism that we've been talking about, is punk's lack of historical perspective. And I suppose maybe the reason why the punks felt like their movement was never going to be exploited and never going to be co-opted is because they didn't have a sense of history. They didn't realise that this had happened to so many like avant-garde movements before them. But this starts off with that. This starts off, as any movie about punk rock should, in the court of Queen Elizabeth I, where her court astrologer, Dr. John Dee, is summoning forth Ariel, the nature spirit from Shakespeare's The Tempest, to take them forward into the 1970s.
Yeah, and then people wonder why it's not punk. Why were they complaining? No, I guess it's like what you just said then, they had no sense of history. And here is a man who is showing you a sense of history straight away. I think one of the joys of the decision to, the totally surprising decision to put Queen Elizabeth I and Dr. John Dee into the mix was to sort of show you that this was a whole rich tapestry of England, which I think Jarman was always interested in exploring as a filmmaker, wasn't it? This sort of almost mythical Albion.
Yeah.
But studied with genuine truths rather than just constantly pandering to this myth of Arcadia or anything like that. It helps the film a lot, I think, because put it this way, there's a review on Letterboxd. I won't name the name because I can't remember it. It's the only reason I won't name the name. But it's a sort of review that sort of says, "Oh, am I shocking you? This is shocking, isn't it? Am I shocking you now? How about now?"
Yes.
And that's their view of the film, and they're entitled to it. But I don't think that is that film. I don't think that is Jubilee, because there's such a tapestry of it. It's not just shock, 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 shock. The shock comes for me from the fact that you can start at such a genteel point as the court of a Tudor queen, and have them sort of weaved in and out of the story. And it's those quieter moments followed by the anarchy on the streets of London that I think does give it a tremendous value and currency of shock, rather than just one after the other sort of juvenile shock tactics.
And I think when it does try to shock you, and there are things in it that are obviously very confrontational, but the way they are filmed is very different to a filmmaker like, say, Larry Clark, who I think is just interested in shock tactics.
Yeah.
That when you have this pivotal scene where Queen Elizabeth II is killed in a botched mugging, the strange thing about that scene is that it is really pastoral and eerie. It's like
pastoral, that's the word I'm looking for.
Yeah, if you wanted to film that scene to shock, and it's, a shocking concept, there are hundreds of ways that you could milk the shock value out of it better than that. But as it is, it ties in with a part of Jarman's work that is gaining more focus now, which is that he is very interested in edgelands and gardens and nature in a way that is very contemporary.
Yes, very much so. Yeah. But pastoral is definitely the word I was looking for then when I was sort of coming up with genteel and sort of thing. But yeah, I mean, I remember first watching this as a teenager, and I don't think I got that it was the Queen at first.
Yeah, that is the one bit where he sort of hedges his bets, isn't it? It's a woman lying on the floor, and I guess she's dressed in a way that at the time people would think, oh, that looks like the Queen. But now, of course, the Queen is so much older that it doesn't quite.
It's the Brenda stereotype of the Queen, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's shot entirely from the back. They've not done that where they get the lookalike who appeared in all those film and TV shows who didn't really look like the Queen anyway.
Is that the one who was in the Doctor Who serial Silver Nemesis?
Which has a lot of parallels with Jubilee, doesn't it?
It does, yeah.
It really does. Again, sort of, people from the past being transported to a present day, getting involved with skinheads. It's
dialogue in iambic pentameter, whole things campus Christmas. Yeah, it's all there, isn't it?
It is. Kevin Clark was definitely a fan of Jubilee, definitely. But yeah, it would have been so easy and much more shocking. Surely they could have picked up one of those Queen lookalikes and made a big thing of that moment where Bodicea, played by Jenny Runnicker, kills her. But it's all shot from a distance. You don't see anything. She's basically, after that, she's just lying on the floor, and a child picks up a sort of diamond and looks through it. Doesn't he? Looks through it, brings it up close to his eye, looks through it, and that's it. Then the next shot is Bod's in the back home with the crown on her head, and I think it's only then that I sussed, oh, that was supposed to be the Queen. Yeah.
Speaking of things that I should have sussed before, how have I only worked out that Bod's name is an allusion to Bodicea?
Bodicea, yeah. There's also Mad, Toy Wilcox's. I can't remember now, but it's short for one of the people that Dr. D would commune with, I believe. Yeah.
Oh, right, spirits. Yeah. Because we should mention that John Dee is a real person and one of the strangest figures in British history in many ways.
Played by one of the strangest figures in British history in many ways.
Yes.
The only man who is now probably featured, I don't know, he might be the only person. Oh no, because there's Ringo Starr as well. I was to say he might be the only person to feature on pop screen twice now, because he's also in the Spice World movie, isn't he? You
He
can't get
is.
two more different films than Spice World and Jubilee.
You really can't, no.
Although the idea, if only in 1997 we could have had the Spice Girls killing Elizabeth I.
Well,
Elizabeth II, I should say. Derek Jarman's Spice World
would have been absolutely incredible. I think we can all
Definitely
agree on that.
Well, yeah, we mean, of course,
Richard O'Brien.
Richard O'Brien. Thank you. Yes.
And it's funny, isn't it? Because this is only a couple of years after the Rocky Horror Picture Show came out, and that was, a studio-backed thing with pretty generous budget. But here, a couple of years afterwards, you've got O'Brien, you've got Nell Campbell, another of the Rocky Horror cast, as Krabs. There's a sense that the two phenomena have not separated as much as they will in the future. Like today, Rocky Horror is almost like a sort of a beloved pantomime, really, isn't it? It's the cuddly, safe face of sexual transgression. And Jubilee just has not had the edge took off it at all.
No, that's right. Yeah, I hadn't thought of that. Yeah, there's a coziness to Rocky Horror now, isn't it? I mean, it's a thing that when I was growing up in the 90s, you watched Rocky Horror high school and it was still like a transgressive act.
Yeah.
I've watched Rocky Horror last night, whereas Jubilee is probably still a bit of a transgressive act, or it certainly has a cachet still surrounding it that has got, as you say, it's still edgy. It's not been softened. It's not been tamed by nostalgia.
Yeah. I think maybe part of that is because the film has not been seen widely enough to become over familiar. But I do think there are still things in it that would jar with a modern audience today, like the presentation of Sphinx and Angel, the two incestuous brothers.
Yeah.
Which is like a mile away from anything I can imagine being in even an art house film now.
True. And very well played as well by Carl Johnson and Ian Charleson.
Yeah.
Chariots of Fire. A world away from Chariots of Fire, isn't it? Playing Angel.
Yeah, in many ways, Ian Charleson's later career offered him few opportunities to say dialogue like, "You clammy slag, you've sat on the KY with your fat ass."
And she does have a fat ass, Toya, doesn't she, in this film? I speak as somebody who likes fat asses, but I mean, that is a fat ass. In the boiler suit later on, that is a fat ass.
She looks cherubic, Toya Wilcox, in this, and I think it's such a clever piece of casting because her role in it is that she's the violent one. I mean, even Bod, who kills the Queen, is like is many rungs on the level of psychosis beneath mad. But
yeah,
I think it would be the
clues in the name, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, the parents doomed her with that one, really, didn't they?
Well, yeah, weirdly, one of the things that I find, again, why I can't buy people say, oh, it's just a shock value film, is when they eventually do, I mean, we're jumping out of ourselves, but in a tit for tat revenge, once Sphinx and Angel and the kid played by Adamant are murdered, Mad and Jordan's amyl nitrate go and stalk a special branch police officer and castrate him in the street. And considering Mad has been...
This is like you saying it's not just shock tactics, right? This is your argument for that.
Yeah, this is... I'm getting there. Trust me, I'm getting there. And but the point is, for the whole of the film, Mad's been built up as this complete loose cannon with no morals whatsoever, finds delight in any form of violence, yet she breaks down crying after she's murdered the policeman. And it's a wonderful bit of acting from both women, really. I think obviously it's Toya's big moment because she gets to cry and she's sort of like,
and it's the moment that kind of cracks her character open.
Character open, exactly. And she's slapping away at the cop as well. But I like what Jordan does, which is she just sort of stands back, and just sort of looks utterly spent by the whole thing, and then sort of retreats away from it to just go and sort of have a moment by herself.
Yeah.
Which I think is really interesting. Really interesting choice. That, yeah.
And I think part of what this rewatch of it really sort of got through to me is that ultimately, on some level, Jarman likes these kids. He doesn't like what they're doing, but he thinks they at least deserve better. And I think that is something idealistic that animates it and makes it more than just a critique of a youth movement that was already getting a fair bit of stick. That was something that I think its detractors at the time did not understand.
I think he certainly has a love-hate relationship with them. But he's kind of saying, look, these kids aren't beyond help. They're not lost. They're not the Myra Hindleys that Amon Nitrates believes to be a childhood heroine. You know, again, that's a shock comment. You know, when I was at school, Myra Hindley was my heroine.
That's a shock comment, but that's also quite a sharp piece of observation, because around the same time that this happened, you had a very short-lived band called the Moors Murderers, which featured, I mean, they all had like bags over their heads, and that was one of their gimmicks. But it had Chrissy Hind and Steve Strange and Sue Catwoman, who was also like one of these kind of fashion leaders of the punk movement alongside Jordan. Yeah. Nowadays, like, as soon as you ask anyone about it, you know, Chrissy Hind always says, look, I was in the band for a month, and you think, well, you know, they broke up after a month. It's not like you were a keyboard player in the Fall for a month. You know, there isn't a rich musical history of this.
Yeah, they try and disassociate themselves from it as if it was just, yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah,
but at the time, it was like the way that punks used to use swastikas. There was a sense of, maybe this is permissible shock tactics. Maybe this will land. It hadn't quite settled in the exact way that, you know, nowadays, if someone wears swastika and goes around sort of saying that Myra Hindley's their hero, you know that they are a shining star of the Young Republicans. But back then, there was this sense that maybe there'll be a time when this lands in a different way, and maybe it's now. Maybe this does look like sort of standard épaté de bourgeoisie.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, and I think what Jarman very cleverly does with the history aspect of, again, it's that whole putting a historical perspective on something that is still just kicking and screaming, being born, really, isn't it? Yeah. Even though it only had a short life, really, before it became something else. That he sort of suggests that history has always been bloody, wretched, violent. So there's nothing that these kids are doing that is any different from other chapters in history. And again, it goes back to Amon Nitrate's history books, isn't it, where she mentions, you know, she talks about Hitler and says, well, what's any different to Hitler than what Napoleon did or what Hannibal did? And Churchill is this revered figure, but did he really change history for the better? Which is, you know, the topics of conversation that we're still having to this very day, certainly about Churchill. Still such a very contemporary, topical conversation to be having. But back then, that was, you can't say that about Churchill.
Although it's funny, I wonder if people are a bit more like that now, because the older audience at the time will, yes, remember Churchill's war leadership, and they'll also remember voting him out in favour of Attlee in 1945. I think this idea of Churchill as completely untouchable, the ultimate prime minister, is something that has gathered over the decades.
It's the rose-tinted glasses of various opportunistic right-wing gammons, really, isn't there? Like Farage and what have you. I always say the thing about Farage and people like that is that they will vomit red, white, and blue till they're blue in the face, basically, won't they? And praise the World War II veterans, or whatever. But in a way, they rely on that generation dying out, because it's that generation that can still say, actually, that's not what we were about. That's not how we we thought, we were fighting people like you, not
Built the welfare state as soon as we got home. Yeah,
exactly.
exactly.
They need those people to die out in a way to make the twisted version of history more palatable, more seen as definite for
Which is
population at
that's
large.
quite a Jarman-esque point, isn't it? I mean, there's a lot that
Yeah.
makes me wish he was still with us now, but I would love to see what someone as historically engaged as well as just politically engaged as him would make of this kind of mythical British history that exists now.
He'd have gone to town on Brexit. Absolutely, would
Completely.
have been
Yeah.
fantastic film
Yeah.
if he had that opportunity. Yeah, that would have been really something. I mean, you can see it. I mean, once Brexit happened, I heard a lot of people reference Jubilee
Really?
as this. As this
Yeah.
idea of harking back to a time or celebrating a time of proper Rule Britannia tradition, while we're in the middle of what looks very much like a dystopia. I mean,
Yeah.
the way that they shoot in East London, they find these derelict, still blitz ravaged neighborhoods, don't they?
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, now it looks like set design from the Children of Men.
Yeah,
But back then,
absolutely.
that's what people were living in back then, wasn't it?
Mm.
They would walk past heaps of rubble that used to be a house, hoardings and stuff like that. But it's dystopia, really, isn't it? And when we were talking about hard Brexit last year, people going, "Oh, it's going to be like Jubilee, then, isn't it?" Everybody be sort of like
Yeah.
on the rampage and living in absolute carnage and destruction, but there'll be people trying to wave the flag about it at the same time.
Yeah, yeah. And it's I think one of the things that makes Jarman's films last is that although he made these films on a shoestring budget and he was never going to get a generous budget to make anything because he was such a subversive filmmaker, but he always manages to wring every last drop out of that budget. And I mean, things like what you're saying about finding the derelict locations is an example of him finding a shortcut to do something really visually striking that I think a filmmaker who was used to having sets built for them would just not know how to start with.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, now you watch it in the context that it is now, and it just looks like a classic of British science fiction, really, rather than a film about punk. It's not just one thing. It can be whatever you want to view it as. Because again, the clever thing is he never really set a year, even though it's called Jubilee, and it's they're sort of suggesting that they've travelled 400 years. It's a sort of alternate reality, really, isn't it?
And I think the fact that it came out in 78, so the audience know that none of this actually happened during the Silver Jubilee, gives it that kind of frisson. And also the fact that, I mean, you mentioned A Clockwork Orange earlier. Clockwork Orange is one of the films that punks in Britain really drew from and really based parts of their look and iconography from. So I think part of what Jarman's reacting to is a kind of a feedback loop. He's been given this very visually oriented, very design oriented movement that is in many ways rooted in cinema. And he knows how to make that work again as cinema. I'm sure for all he had his quibbles with punk, he was the kind of guy who would look at a Jamie Reid poster and think, yeah, that's terrific. That's exactly what it needs to be.
I mean, he loved the aesthetic, didn't he? I mean, I mean, it was the instant attraction of Jordan. In fact, I've got to read it out because I love that quote from his diary. On the first meeting of Jordan, or rather, not meeting, the first sight of Jordan, because I don't think they actually spoke on the first meeting.
Right.
It was, he spotted her at Victoria Station, and he's wrote in his diary, white patent boots clattering down the platform. Transparent plastic miniskirt revealing a hazy pudenda. I think they played John Peel's show later that day, didn't they? Hazy pudenda. Venus t-shirt, smudged black eye paint, covered with a flaming blonde beehive, the face that launched 1,000 tabloids, art history as makeup.
Lovely.
I mean, it's a beautiful description of a literal walking work of art, which she was. I mean, that's it. People who complain about the film as not being punk, can we swear on this?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Well, they can get to fuck, can't they? Because if Jordan says it's okay, and Jordan created punk as far as I'm concerned. So if Jordan said it's okay, then
and also
that's fine by me.
Part of the reason why I think Jordan was maybe drawn to it is because even as early as 1977, she had seen that commodifying aspect being brought to punk. She had invented this look that was so iconic that people were already putting it on postcards. She was getting stopped by tourists who wanted a photo with an authentic London punk. And, what does an authentic London punk look like? Well, it looks like Jordan. She was seeing how this movement was already being reduced to the base saleable element. So of course she reacted enthusiastically when someone came to her with a script that is about that. And it's also, I think we have to stress this because maybe we haven't enough yet, it's also really fucking funny.
It's a very funny script. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
a very funny script. I always find, I mean, the Super 8 film that's in the middle, well, not the middle, it's quite early on, isn't it?
Yeah.
Of Jordan, it's called Jordan's Dance, in it, where she's doing a ballet dance around flaming rubble on,
Yes.
I think is it Butler's Wharf? I'm not sure. There's a there's a thing in it that fascinates me, terrifies me, and finds utterly hilarious, and that's the naked guy in the face mask of Michelangelo's David.
Yeah.
Because that will never not look odd in a really unsettling kind of, oh, that's weird. He's just sort of stood there completely starkers with one hand on his hip, watching her dance around the flames. But it's a giant fucking David head.
It does have a sort of Vic Reeves big night out quality to it.
Exactly. I see that, and it's something that I instantly find odd, weird, and disorientating. But then I find utterly hilarious because of Vic Reeves.
Yeah. But I think the script too is just cracking line after cracking line. I love when Krabs asks the kid, the Adamant character, what he does, and he goes, nothing, I'm a musician. It's brilliant.
It's just a very funny, but it's like that. I think it might, for some people, it might take a few goes to watch to think, am I supposed to find this funny? Or am I supposed to find this utterly shocking? When really you can find both things in it.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that's another thing that saves it from just being shock tactics, is that it is done with a sense of humor. It is done with a sense of learning too. I mean, there's so much erudition just in that opening section with Dr. John Dee and Ariel, which I think is, there's the scene where Ariel first appears and he's sort of reflecting a mirror, which is on the one hand a very cheap way to give the sense that he's arrived in a flash of light. The mirror is reflecting the sun towards the camera. In between flashes of light, Ariel appears. But it's also basically scrying. It's the technique that Dee and other mystics of that age used, where they would look into a glass and they would flick it back and forth so that the sun flickered in and out of their eyes, and they would use it to induce visions.
Yeah. It's a very knowledgeable film in that respect, isn't it? This is not a man who has not done his homework or has just happened upon these things. He knows exactly what he's doing when he's putting things like that together. And it's such a well presented, like you say, you wouldn't think it had a low budget. Like it's just a mirror in the camera, but it doesn't matter. It looks fantastic.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Ariel's got those black eyes, hasn't he? Which look like ping pong balls, sort of painted black, and they probably are really painted black and sort of wedged under his eyeball. But it doesn't matter because it looks incredible.
And I think Jarman is very good at encoding the meaning of his films into things like set design and costumes and props, so that even when it is just a scene of, bored mad and craps lying around talking crap and giving each other like temporary tattoos or something.
And there's a lot of scenes like that.
There's a lot of scenes like that. But there is always something in it that sort of feeds into the film's larger themes, even if it's just a bit of graffiti on the wall behind them, or there's an early scene with Mad like sat in front of a poster, which is just it's probably like a Mirror or something, a tabloid headline about one of the Sex Pistols being stabbed.
Yes, I noticed that. I watched it again last night and I noticed that, and I wasn't sure if I'd spotted it before. But yeah, that's an interesting one. Yeah. And there's also Angela Sphinx are reading a newspaper, and it's something like "Victim of the Pickets" or something, as if there's sort of gun-toting trade unionists out there, which would be an ideal world for me, really.
I saw that and I wondered about it. I couldn't quite sort of get a handle on that, but yeah, you're right. It is meant to be like some sort of propaganda sheet, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, you imagine it's the sort of thing that would, be the headline of the day, and it's like say it's not technically 1977, but it's for a late 70s audience, so they're going to think of the Winter of Discontent and things like that. That's all wrapped up in there. They can all read into those sort of things.
I said this on Director's Lottery about John Waters' films, and I think it also applies to Derek Jarman's films, that I am bitterly disappointed when an actor in a Derek Jarman film turns out to be just an actor, rather than, in the case of Hermione Demarine, who plays Chaos, a former reporter for the International Times who briefly worked as a tightrope walker.
Yeah. There are some great sort of characters that are just seemingly plucked out of thin air or out of this weird climate that Jarman sort of assembled around him, really. But
I love the ex-soldier with his garden gnomes. I think he's Max, my favourite cameo. Yeah,
Max is brilliant, and it's in a way it's a callback to the same sort of character that the actor played in Sebastian as well. Because I'm sure he's called Max in Sebastian, and he's the one with the syphilitic nose in Sebastian, and it is that kind of battle-hardened squaddy, but then suddenly this huge soft side that he's just giving it all up, and he's there with his garden gnomes and his flowers and bingo on a night. But there's something about the fact that he's Scouse as well just sets it off for me. You coming to have the bingo tonight, lads?
You can weirdly believe him as Scouse, can't you? There's something especially Scouse about this former soldier tending to his garden gnome collection.
Well, he reminds me a bit of it's the Scouse thing, not the character, just the Scouse thing of the guy in Ideal that Alfie Joey played, who's the Scouse, who's obsessed with his allotment, isn't he? It's that guy, isn't it? Gotta go and get some Chad.
We should double back a bit, though, to some of the people who are actors in this. We should talk a bit about Ian Charleston and Carl Johnson, because in many ways their later careers diverged pretty radically. Johnson has had a very prolific acting career, but for the purposes of this show, he's mostly interesting in that he remained very, very loyal to Jarman and appeared in a lot more of his films. Whereas Charleston, I think, had to decry this or something, didn't he?
I imagine he did, yeah, to sort of the way his career was going. I imagine there is a bit of that. Yeah, well, I did that because I needed the money, or I did that because I mean, I don't know the full details, but I imagine so. Yeah. Whereas, as you say, Johnson remained incredibly loyal. Got the lead role in Wittgenstein, which I think is a fantastic performance from him. He's one of my favourite actors, really. Carl Johnson and he's very good in this. Well, they both are. and that's another problem with the film as well, because when people sort of say, "Oh, it's very juvenile. They're very pretentious acting. They're non-actors." It's like, have you seen the cast? They're not non-actors at all.
I was unaware that Jenny Runacre was an amateur. It's like, what the hell?
It's like, all right, it's Toya Wilcox's possibly her first big movie, but and yes, Jordan's not an actress, but I mean, Ian Charleston, Carl Johnson. Linda Spurrier, is it Spurrier? Is that how you pronounce her surname?
She's so great in this movie.
She's brilliant in it, absolutely brilliant. Scenes with those three in bed, there's just something, and again, it defies expectation, because you're here to watch a punk film, and there's three very softly spoken people basically having sex in bed.
I think there is a part of those scenes where you almost forget that you were watching an incestuous bisexual threesome, and the whole thing just has a kind of cozy sitcom air to it.
Especially when they then plod off down to Max's house to look at his plants and arrange a game of bingo.
The Good Life, yeah.
That's good.
Yeah, Runacre, I think, is fantastic in this, and I think she in general does not get the plaudits she deserves, because every now and then there is an actor where, like Terence Stamp in the 60s, I would say is my ultimate example, where part of you just wants to applaud them for working with every interesting director of their era.
Yeah.
Runacre has worked with Jarman, Antonioni, Cassavetes, Pasolini, Roeg, Tony Richardson, and it's not all Tony stuff. She can do a good genre director too. Freddie Francis,
yeah, and she's also in The Final Program with John Finch.
I don't know that.
Oh, it's people will be screaming now listening to this or watching this. It's a guy who used to direct a lot of the Avengers, and it's based on, is it Michael Moorcock or Michael Morrock? I can never pronounce that guy's name.
I also cannot pronounce it, but I know exactly who you're referring to.
That's a wonderfully strange. So Robert somebody is the director. He did the Avengers. He did a lot of Avengers episodes and The Abominable Dr. Phibes.
Right. Oh, yeah, there it is on her CV. Robert. Oh boy, we were having some pronunciation problems before.
Is it difficult?
It's Robert Fewest, F-U-E-S-T.
Yeah, Fust. I think, I'm not sure. I take a running jump at it as well. Robert Fust, I call it. But yeah, that is a really strange, interesting film. But the character, I can't remember the name of the character, but he's sort of like this
Jerry Cornelius.
This kind of weird hippie LSD taking James Bond.
And he's open source, isn't he, Jerry Cornelius? Moorcock is very famous for allowing other authors to create Jerry Cornelius stories.
Yeah, in whatever way they wish. Yeah. But she's very good in that film as well, and she looks stunning. The costume design and that, and this is a woman who can wear a costume.
Oh yeah,
and she just looks incredible in it. Yeah.
She kept reminding me, looks-wise, I kept thinking of Keeley Hawes in this, particularly as Bod. She really looked like Keeley Hawes to me.
Well, there's that kind of loose-limbed adolescent androgyny, I guess, isn't there?
Good way of putting
it. That maybe brings in that, and the fact that she is wearing like
power suits.
Power suits. Yeah.
It's got a bit of her Line of Duty kind of ashes to ashes wardrobe. Yeah,
definitely. Yeah.
No, I think it's a really great film. I think it's flawed, but I don't know how you could take the flaws out without making it substantially less interesting.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, it's one of those films that I don't think there is another way of doing it. You're right. I don't think there's, and I think it's almost like a Jenga. You don't want to take anything out because
Yeah.
it'll just collapse upon itself. Really, there are some bits that you do sit back and think, well, was that required? But even those bits have something to say about either the movement itself, society as a whole at the time, or whatever Jarman's trying to say about this yearning for a loss of English identity that perhaps never existed anyway. There's always something going on there. And it's a film that spectacularly shows its own workings as well for you, in that there's a great scene early on in the derelict streets where somebody has just graffitied postmodern.
Yes. That was like the one bit where I thought that is maybe a bit on the nose. That
it is literally show your workings out here. It's like it's like an A-level exam paper, isn't it? Of how would you make a punk film about punk that has only really existed for the past 12 months? Show your workings out here.
But it is one of those films, and one of those films that when they come off, I love, where every single detail of it, even if it's just, as you say, a piece of graffiti in the background, can be sort of unpicked and traced back to some wider web of meaning. It's a very Alan Moore-ish film, isn't it? And I'm not just saying that because John Dee's there. The whole structuring and attitude of it feels very League of Extraordinary Gentlemen.
Do you know, it's weird you should say that, because when I watched it again last night, I thought, why has nobody adapted this as a graphic novel?
Yeah.
Because that would be a really interesting, it would give it that extra life to sort of make it a bit more accessible to the viewing public, really. And it might, I mean, it is a cult. There's no mistaking it's a cult, but it could be an even bigger cult film if it has a bit more of an extra life to it. And if somebody was to sort of make it a graphic novel, I think that would give it a bit more diversity.
It would put it in a
audience.
medium where I think people are used to reading stories that way, partly because with a graphic novel you can just sort of pore over it and just go deep into it and look up every single detail in it. And in a film, obviously, you're limited because it has to move at the speed of a projector. But I think that there is just something in Jarman's precise aesthetics and the way that he likes to layer meanings into every single aspect of the mise-en-scène that, you're right, it does feel very graphic novel like.
It probably influenced some graphic novelists. Like I could imagine that you would see a direct line from this to Tank Girl, perhaps.
Oh yeah. I'd be amazed if Moore wasn't a fan. I mean, you can't expect him to stay away from a film where Dr. John Dee's a supporting character. No.
That's true. Yeah.
But yes, no, I think that's covered it. It's like I say, it's a film I heartily recommend, and even if you find it deeply annoying, it's a productive and interesting form of annoyance.
Yeah, even if you find it deeply annoying, it's that's probably done its job then, hasn't it? Because it is punk at the end of the day. It's never going to be something that you're going to sit down and find a cozy viewing. Even if you love it, it's deliberately astringent, abrasive, all those AS words, it's deliberately so. So I mean, I think if it's annoying you, it's done its job, basically.
Absolutely. So on that annoying note, that's been your lot from Pop Screen for another week. As always, if you subscribe to our Patreon at www.patreon.com/The Geek Show, you will get a monthly bonus episode as well as our other movie podcast, Director's Lottery. Or if you want, you can just sort of give us a rating on iTunes, share us around, because, the simple things are also a bigger help than you might think. But until then, when we're back next week with something new, I'm Graham.
I am the ghost of Derek Jarman's time.
And
No, sorry. I am Mark Cunliffe.
we'll see you all next week.
Bye.